What if the habits you develop to survive your grief are the same habits that are making it harder to heal from it? I want to sit with that question for a moment before I answer it, because I think it deserves more than a quick acknowledgement. Most of us, when we are in the middle of grief, develop routines and patterns that help us get through the immediate period. The things we do, the ways we arrange the day, the small behaviors we use to manage what we are feeling. These are not wrong choices. They are survival choices. And at the time they are made, survival is exactly what they are for. The problem is that survival choices and healing choices are sometimes the same thing, and sometimes they are not. And the habits that helped you survive the first year can quietly become the habits that prevent you from fully living in the third or fifth or seventh year without anyone noticing the transition. I want to be clear before I describe these habits that I am not a grief counselor and not a mental health professional of any kind. I am a woman who was widowed 9 years ago, who navigated that experience with varying degrees of understanding and success, and who has observed, both in my own life and in the lives of women around me, the specific ways that grief can settle into a person's daily routine in a form that feels like coping, but functions like staying. Leave a comment below as we go if any of what I describe resonates with where you are or where you have been. The first habit is keeping the person's physical space exactly as it was. The chair they always sat in, unchanged. A room preserved as it was on the last day they used it. Their possessions arranged as they left them, not because the arrangement is useful or beautiful, but because altering it feels like a loss that the first loss did not yet fully require. I understand this impulse completely, and I do not think there is anything wrong with it in the immediate period. The problem arrives when the preservation extends not just for months but for years, when the arrangement becomes a fixed feature of the house rather than a temporary honoring, because it is no longer serving the person who is still there. The frozen space is a physical argument against the passage of time, and the passage of time is the only actual container for grief. The second habit is maintaining their preferences rather than your own. Watching programs you do not particularly enjoy because they watched them. Buying the food they preferred at the grocery store. Keeping the furniture arranged the way they liked it rather than the way you would arrange it. Each of these is, individually, a very small thing. Together, and extended over years, they represent a kind of suspended animation of the self, a daily practice of setting your own preferences aside in deference to someone who is no longer there to have any preferences at all. It is an act of love that has outlasted the context that made it loving, and in its place it has become something more like avoidance, a way of not having to encounter the uncomfortable discovery of what you yourself actually want. The third habit is returning repeatedly to the same mental territory. The last period of their illness, if there was one, the last conversation, the things you said or did not say, the decisions that were made and the ones that were not. Many people in grief have a mental route they walk with considerable regularity, often without choosing to, that covers this same ground. Sometimes this is useful. Grief requires that the same terrain be walked more than once before it is ready to be walked less often. But the loop that is walked not because it produces new understanding, but because it has become automatic, that serves a function different from processing. It keeps the mind near the loss rather than moving from it. And that proximity, chosen or not, has a cost over time. If you enjoy this channel and want to support my work, just look directly below the video player, right next to the subscribe button, and click the button that says Join. That is how you become a Smart Organizer. Smart Organizers members get exclusive videos, a loyalty badge in the comments, and custom channel emojis. I would love to have you there. The fourth habit is the opposite of the third, and I include it because it is equally common and equally limiting. The total avoidance of any reminder. Putting away every photograph, not saying the name, steering every conversation away from any mention of the person who died. This is not the same as being stoic. It is closer to being unable to tolerate the contact at all, and what it produces is not healing but suppression. The grief does not disappear because it is not spoken of. It goes somewhere else, below the surface of daily life, where it continues to affect the quality of everything without being accessible to the ordinary work of integration that conversation and remembering actually accomplish. The fifth habit is measuring every day by the grief. Not in the sense of being aware that grief is present, which is unavoidable and appropriate, but in the sense of using the day's grief as the primary metric by which the day is assessed. A good day is a day when the grief was manageable. A bad day is a day when it was not. This turns grief into the organizing principle of your experience, and organizing principles have a way of perpetuating themselves. When the grief is what the day is about, the day tends to produce more of what it is about. The sixth habit is filling every hour so the grief has no space. I call this one a habit rather than a choice because it tends to become one. The schedule that began as a response to intolerable quietness becomes, over time, simply the schedule, dense and full and organized around the implicit premise that stillness is something to be avoided. The problem is that the work of grief requires some stillness to do itself in. Integration, which is what happens when grief eventually becomes memory rather than wound, happens partly in the quiet spaces of a life that are not filled with other things. The person who has arranged their life to leave no such spaces has also, unintentionally, arranged it to prevent the quieter work of healing from taking place. Leave a comment below if this one lands as something you recognize, because I think the busyness habit is one of the most common and least examined features of extended grief, and I am curious whether it reflects something in your own experience. The seventh habit is the one I think is most important to name clearly, because I believe it is both very common and very rarely discussed. It is treating the grief as the last remaining connection to the person you lost. The underlying belief, usually unexamined, is that grief is the container in which the person still lives, and that allowing the grief to diminish would mean allowing the person to diminish further. This creates an incentive structure that runs directly against healing. If grief equals connection, then healing equals loss. If feeling better means losing the last tangible link, then feeling better is not something you are going to allow yourself to do fully. What I want to say about this, from my own experience, is that the connection does not live in the grief. It lives in the love, which does not diminish when the grief does. The grief is the acute form of what the love becomes when it has nowhere to go. It is the love looking for its context. Over time, the love finds other containers: memory, gratitude, the specific quality of who you became in part because of the time you shared. The grief, when it has done its work, becomes those things. And becoming those things is not losing the person. It is keeping them in a form that allows you to be fully present in your own life at the same time. The eighth habit is continuing to define yourself to others primarily through the loss. I am so-and-so's widow. My husband passed. It has been 3 years now. There is nothing wrong with any of these sentences. The problem is when they become the primary introduction to yourself in new social situations, when the identity of bereaved person continues to be the identity you lead with long after the loss has moved from the center to a part of the larger whole of who you are. The social role of the bereaved is real and legitimate and deserves acknowledgement. It is also, if it becomes the dominant self-description years into grief, a kind of housing for the loss that maintains its centrality in your life, partly by constantly reestablishing its centrality in how others understand you. The ninth habit is seeking out triggers in the way you would return to a wound to check whether it still hurts. This is different from normal, healthy remembering, which is integrated and often genuinely comforting. This is the looking at photographs not because you want to remember, but because you want to feel the loss again. Returning to the places, reading the messages, listening to the songs, with an intensity that is less about honoring the memory and more about maintaining the acute quality of the grief that you have come to associate with caring. The distinction between the two is something only you can feel from the inside. But if you notice yourself seeking out the pain, rather than simply allowing it when it arrives, that is worth paying attention to. The 10th habit is not letting yourself be glad. The suppression of genuine pleasure, humor, or aliveness in the presence of other people, or even alone, because allowing yourself to feel genuinely well carries a quality of disloyalty that has not yet been examined or released. I described a version of this in the widowhood video I made some time ago, and I want to say it again here because I think it cannot be said enough. The moments of genuine gladness that begin to arrive as grief slowly shifts are not a betrayal of the person you lost. They are evidence that the self is returning. They are exactly what is supposed to happen in a process that is working as it is supposed to work. Suppressing them does not honor the person who died. It simply delays the life that is still in front of you. The 10 habits I have described are not character flaws. They are the natural residue of love that has not yet found its transformed form. What I have learned, across 9 years and much imperfect practice, is that the transformation happens not because you decide it will, but because you stop preventing it. Most of these habits are forms of prevention, ways of keeping the grief where it is, rather than allowing it to do what grief eventually does when it is not obstructed. You do not have to do the healing. You have to stop doing the things that are stopping it from happening. Tell me in the comments which of these 10 habits reflects something you recognize, whether in yourself or in someone you care about. I find that the specific and honest conversations this community has in the comments are among the most valuable things this channel produces, and this is a topic where I believe specificity is particularly useful. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I would love to have you here. I post regularly on topics like this one, and the subscribe button is just below. And if this is your first time here, I would be glad to have you subscribe. I will see you in the next one.